Welcome if you haven't been here before. Welcome back if you have been here before. We're delighted to have this seminar on democratizing the data field with Arne from the Data Justice Lab, and we also have two panelists or discussants as well. I'm going to hand over to Jude Townsend, who is from LPS, and I just want to say Jude will be joining SHL Core from the autumn term, so we're delighted to be having Jude as part of our team come the autumn term. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, so I was trying to think what the provenance for this seminar was, and I think it was a conversation about integrating more sort of ethics and governance into thinking about our media and humanities research, and it led to thinking about what a good panel would look like. And we couldn't be happier with the speakers that have come today. They're very well placed to speak about those. So I'm not going to elaborate on the title or anything, so we're going to hear directly from Arne on the research that he's been doing over the past few years. But I will just do a few brief introductions to our speakers so you know a bit about them. So Arne Hintz is reader at the Cardiff School of Journalism, Media and Culture and co-director of the Data Justice Lab, which is doing wonderful things in this space. As he describes it, his research focuses on the practices and conditions of digital citizenship, combining work on media activism, communications policy and datafication. And I'm imagining that we will have opportunity to discuss some of those concepts and definitions today. And he's got an enormous range of roles, publications, projects. I won't detail them all now, but they cover surveillance, democratic auditing, digital citizenship. And I think I first heard Arne speak maybe over 10 years ago or something on transparency and digital communications policy. And I can testify that he was definitely ahead of the game on many of the governance issues that are now very much centre stage. So I think we're very lucky to be hearing from him today. The same applies for our second guest, Becky Hogg, who's going to be responding to Arne's talk. She is, well, I say guest, but she is actually affiliated to Sussex as an honorary research fellow in the School of Law. And she's a writer specialising in the social impact of new technology. And she's written widely for a range of media publications and wrote one of the earliest accounts, maybe the earliest, I don't know, of hacker culture.
Probably not the
yeah. Barefoot into cyberspace, and very fittingly you can access that open access online. She had a background in online journalism, including as managing editor of Open Democracy, a site with which I'm sure many of you are familiar, and then became the first full-time executive director of the Open Rights Group, again another very familiar organisation, and other members here as well, former members I think here as well. And then she went on, when you describe yourself as a former activist, which I think is interesting, but went on to a role as programme officer for the Open Society Foundation's information programme, where she engaged with issues of discrimination in automated decision-making, algorithmic transparency and narrow AI, and was awarding various projects money in that area. And I think there is a connection to the Data Justice Lab, which you may elaborate on later. And I'll just add that when I first encountered Becky was also around over 10 years ago, I think, and you were on a stage with Noam Chomsky. So we are. So I'm very glad that she's joining us today. We're very happy.
This on the cheek, sorry.
Edit this bit. So we're going to hear from Arne for about 45 minutes, I think, and then go to Becky for a response, and then we can open it up into a more relaxed and open discussion with also members of the audience who are participating remotely. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Thanks for making this possible. Sorry for my voice. I had a bit of a bad cold the last few days. It's getting better now, but kind of how it is in the aftermath is sometimes that you kind of lose off your voice or so. But I hope we'll manage to get through this. Yeah, former activist. That's it. I was just wondering if I would see myself as former activist potentially. But yeah, let's not dwell on that. In the current incarnation, I guess, yes, as I said, I'm working at Cardiff University at the School of Media and Communication and Journalism, Media and Culture, rather. And a few of us a few years ago formed this entity, this kind of research center that we're running there, which is the Data Justice Lab. It came out of a multi-year research project that we did almost 10 years ago. We started almost 10 years ago about digital surveillance post-Snowden and people's responses to this. And yeah, one of the striking things I think that you could see back then and that were interesting to us was this distinction between digital rights and the broader range of issues around social justice, between tech issues and the broader social justice agenda. And this led us to the idea and framework of data justice and a kind of research agenda to explore this connection. Now, as you see from the title of this talk, this is not what I will focus on today, really, but it's the context and the institutional and thematic context, I guess, of this more recent work here. So to stay for a moment on the theme of data justice, I think it has become quite a broad research agenda since we started working on it about 5-6 years ago. And this quote is just one possible definition. There are many, of course. An analysis of data that pays particular attention to structural inequality, highlighting the unevenness of implications and experiences of data across different groups and communities in society. So, as we know, probably the rollout of data and AI has deep implications for people. The question of who can cross borders, who gets healthcare, on what terms, who goes to prison even. Data is not collected about everyone in the same way. The implications are not the same for everyone. And there are deep inequalities also as to who and how can resist and respond and engage with this. A number of influential scholars and publications have addressed these data-related inequalities and sometimes also discriminatory designs of algorithms. These are just a couple of really random examples from recent years on the role of data in social services, and of course the implications of data analytics and race and ethnic backgrounds. But just a number of publications have come out that are quite interesting in this regard. So here, this is from our group. On the top row, you can see the 4 directors of the current directors of our lab, or rather how we looked a few years ago. Well, okay, let's move on. And in the second row, some of our research assistants, PhD students, affiliates, and fellows. And those at the front here, Harry and Jess, were particularly also influential in this project and the research that I'm talking about here, and that who helped us a lot with this. And we've tried to contribute to this emerging research agenda on data justice, and more broadly, we might say the field of critical data studies, through a number of research projects. And this is here on the left side. This is just a selection here. These are projects that I led or have been particularly involved with and that are particularly relevant for what I'm talking about today. Others have focused on other related issues around data harms, data colonialism, and so on. But these are projects, I guess, that are particularly those that I found particularly relevant for my own work, and also that address how we are governed through data analytics, but then also the ways of civic participation in and intervention into public decision-making around the deployment of data and AI. Our outputs include books like the one on data justice that came out just last year in September, and an earlier one, a couple of years earlier, on digital citizenship in the Datafied society. And also we've held many events with international participants, including 2 data justice conferences. And the last one was that one over there, was 2 years ago, on the very theme of civic participation. And the next one is actually going to be this year in June, 19th and 20th of June. If anybody would like to travel to Cardiff around that time, that would be a nice opportunity. And while that one was as many activities at that time entirely online, this one will be offline again and in Cardiff. And on the subject that I want to talk about here, we've had a report out last year on civic participation in the Datafied society, Also a public sector guidebook that summarizes some of the points that we make in this report for public sector workers who want to engage with the public. And also a website, datafied.society.org, that highlights some of these issues to mostly, I guess, to a non-academic audience and tries to address these issues in a kind of more in a broader way. Yeah, and for the rest of my time here, this is what basically all this is what I would like to focus on. So let's look for a moment at what we mean by datafication and by the datafied society, so we can perhaps understand why also this focus on participation and democracy is particularly relevant in our view. Now, data analytics and AI are being rolled out not just in the commercial sector and platforms, but across public services and government. The most far-reaching project, which has been in the media quite a bit over the years, maybe the Chinese social credit score system, or the attempt, let's say, towards a systematic assessment of not just creditworthiness, but trustworthiness more generally of citizens that is applied in many or all areas of life, and is based on a wide variety of data about people's lives and social interactions, not just credit data, but a broad range of data sources. Scoring systems and similar forms of data analytics are also emerging in the West. A prominent example that was discussed for a few years has been the use of data scores in the criminal justice system in the US particularly, the use of data analytics in courts, that has been where data and data analytics have been used to create a risk assessment of people that are arrested to predict and rate the likelihood of them committing future crimes, and thereby inform sentencing. And this has led to a better understanding, not just of how data is used, but also of the possible discriminatory effects of data analytics, as we could see here in this example there. The white guy with a serious criminal record has a lower risk score, supposedly, according to, as a result of this form of data analytics, than the black woman who was arrested for a fairly minor offense. Data about the living conditions of children is compiled to create a risk assessment for the child and assess when public authorities should intervene. Data about refugees is compiled to create risk scores in some cases to find out whether someone is a genuine refugee. Predictive analytics are used in predictive policing to understand where best to deploy police, or in the health sector to allocate medical resources. And typically, these forms of data analytics don't replace human decisions. They're not pure forms of automated decision-making, but they inform and thus heavily, that's maybe controversial, but let's say affect human decisions. And to what extent it affects human decisions, that's an interesting separate debate that I'm not going into here, but yeah, let's leave it at that. One of our, or not quite actually, one of our recent projects at the lab, before we looked into questions of participation, was to find out to what extent scoring systems or other similar forms of data analytics are used by the public sector in the UK. And so we looked at cases where local authorities compiled large amounts of data about inhabitants covering vast areas of personal life in what some of them call a data warehouse or a data lake, or some call it the golden view of citizens. Also, police forces use data for predictive policing. And this is an example from Bristol. And we've seen, of course, then also examples of how people are segmented into categories based on a variety of data points. Like this is from Experian, actually, the Experian data categories. There are over 60 or so. This is just a small snippet. And so Experian it's basically a commercial enterprise that assesses every household according to a wide variety of data points and sells this analysis to many clients. And they have a branch that sells it to sales data to commercial clients, but also another one that sells data to public sector clients to influence and to inform public sector decision making. And there are many other cases like that. Now, broadly, what this means is just a few points, is that, first of all, I would say that the internet and other digital infrastructure is increasingly about extracting, exploiting, processing, analyzing personal and behavioral data. That there are, oh, sorry about that. There are growing areas of public administration that are based on, or at least informed by, the aggregation of that data for the purpose of profiling, categorizing, sorting, rating, ranking, segmenting populations, and then treating them distinctly. And decisions on public service provision and interventions by the state are increasingly based on that. Scoring systems and other similar forms of data analytics are an important part of these forms of these mechanisms that categorize and assess citizens. They compile a score from scoring systems, particularly then a score from a wide variety of online and offline data, with the purpose of allocating and prioritizing commercial but also public services. And generally, we can see a rollout of predictive analytics for managing social risks and thus managing populations. Sorry, got that in something in my throat. Yeah.
You want a month, Dan?
Sure, why not? Thank you. How do I do this? Okay.
Yeah, little box.
Huh? Sorry.
I didn't see the video.
Okay, like this. Thanks. Fantastic.
I can get you more water if you need.
Perfect. No, sorry about that. I thought it would all be gone by today, but it just takes longer than you think. Good. So that alone, of course, is not necessarily a normative assessment yet. Data analytics have been useful in allocating public resources in health and other sectors, but there have been many concerns, including biases and inequalities, and how people are assessed through data, how people are stigmatized through that, and so on. And here I want to not address the whole range of critiques and concerns that have come up. And there is other work on data harms and database discrimination and so on that has focused on that a lot. I just want to highlight a particular set of concerns, and that relates then to questions of civic participation and democracy. So the first point we might want to start with is the question of accountability and transparency. Scoring and other forms of data analytics take place mostly without the knowledge of those that are being scored, and how this is done remains pretty obscure. Some of us may remember Pasquale's point on the black box society. And so we're increasingly classified according to criteria that we don't know about, with consequences that we don't know about, and without an open way of redress. We might say, thinking about this a little bit further, that prediction of citizen behavior undermines citizen agency. Scoring and other forms of predictive analytics use information about past events to predict our behavior for the future. So, and what this means is that it creates a static image of society, right? What happened before will happen again. And it leaves little space for change and for people's own agency. if we are continuously profiled and categorized, now performance as citizens is increasingly assessed and evaluated. This means power is conferred onto the data collector, the platform business or state, not the citizen, right? And this means what we see is the direction where we're going in that sense is the disempowerment of citizens, of people, which also has been discussed in academic literature, for example, with the context of concept of digital resignation by Draper and Turo, and others, also some work that we have done, that we as users, as citizens, as people are in a digital and datafied society are increasingly unsure about what is happening about data, with our data and so on. We don't know about it. We may now have possibilities to find out about this, or rights to find out about this through GDPR and these kind of policies, but still not really in reality, not really many possibilities to do that. And yes, and so at the end of the day, we resign to the fact that we know very little, but we have to work with, like, in a digital context anyway. And so, yeah, digital resignation. This contradicts a little bit the earlier enthusiasm about digital citizenship, right? Which was all about, like, the digital tools, digital platforms as a means for empowerment. And we've seen that kind of shift a little bit, let's say. And more broadly, we could say this raises questions for the role of the sovereign, the people, in the context of datafied governance. We might even say it contradicts the very idea of democracy. What we're seeing is that the sovereign does not have much knowledge, understanding, or say in how it is treated. And so the question becomes, how do we participate as citizens in algorithmic governance? How do we intervene into the processes that increasingly organize society? How do we advance civic agency and democracy in the governance of data and AI? And there have, of course, been others who have thought about this, and there are interesting approaches. For example, the field of algorithmic accountability, with the goal of making the workings of algorithms transparent and explainable, and to understand how data systems work, and to unwrap the black box of algorithms. Or recent and emerging research on data trusts, on data cooperatives, and so on, as institutionalized forms of citizen-oriented and citizen-based data governance. And this is all very useful, but it also has some limitations, I would say. Algorithmic accountability is, at the end of the day, a technical approach that will probably only ever involve a small group of people with the necessary expertise. It's important, but of course limited in some ways. If we talk about the broader kind of, if we're interested in broader practices of participation and democratization. Data trusts are about the setting up of new, potentially participatory institutions that are important, but again, don't necessarily address the wider societal debates and governmental decisions about data use. Now, our interest at the lab in looking at this theme has been on public participation in these broader debates and decisions. So we've been interested in, let's say, perhaps the political side of that, if we understand the political as in a broader sense. Possibilities for raising people's voices in the debate and decisions about the rollout of data analytics. And that then was the starting point of a 3-year project called Towards Democratic Auditing, funded by the OSF, and in which we explored 6 themes. So the first one was institutional context and dynamics. Basically, why is government involving citizens or not involving citizens? What are the challenges here? What are the practices? What are the obstacles and hurdles? Secondly, models of civic engagement. How can citizen assemblies, citizen juries, other methods of deliberation and engagement be useful in this context? Thirdly, oversight and advisory bodies. Can there be a kind of participatory oversight of this? And fourthly, civil society strategies. What are promising approaches of campaigning, of interventions from civil society, from NGOs, from digital rights groups, and so on. And fifth, and kind of a bit related to this civil society point, alternative imaginaries. What are new concepts and ideas that allow for citizen-centered and inclusive forms of data governance? And six, data literacy. What do we need to understand? How can we build capacity in that sense? We conducted 64 interviews. We did a range of document analysis, and we had a fact-finding workshop with several dozen organizers, activists, and government representatives. We had a conference that also was part of the project, and so on. And actually, each of these 6 themes was a fully fledged research project in itself. And here I just want to provide some very brief snapshots of them, and then talk about one of them, just one of them a little bit more. And that's the second one here, models of civic engagement. So a few snapshots of the others, just institutional dynamics. Well, what we see then is just really in a nutshell, right? Largely an absence of citizen and civil society consultancy by local UK authorities, focusing on the UK and focusing on local authorities particularly, with the predominant view that public consultations are not necessary in this field, or people wouldn't understand it anyway, and so we'll just have to move on with it and do it ourselves. There are some attempts of informing the public, but very few of meaningful involvement in decisions. On oversight and advisory bodies, it's quite interesting in this country, I think, because there's really an emergence, or has been over the years, of the past few years, an emergence of a broad set of advisory bodies, from the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, but more closely related to government, to the Turing Institute, to, I mean, Royal Society has done a lot in this field, and so on, to the Ada Lovelace Institute, maybe at kind of more the civil society end of things. And so if we look at oversight in this kind of more broader perspective and include advisory institutions, there's been quite a lot. There is quite a bit of an infrastructure here in this country, I would say now, and to uphold accountability and public interest in this field, to provide also guidance to industry and government. But yeah, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily participatory, and it's not really the purpose of these institutions. Typically, they're not set up to with the prime purpose of involving the public. But in our context here, that's of course something that's interesting, and something to state. First of all, there isn't really participatory oversight beyond some sporadic engagement efforts, which are often typically really about public opinion gathering. Elsewhere, there are some attempts of forms of community oversight. There are some initiatives in the US that are quite interesting, that are more kind of bottom up, but of course that's a different approach to the kind of more institutional approach that we looked at and that we have here. Civil society strategies. Well, there are, again, I think in this country quite a good number of organizations, of civil society organizations, working in the field of digital rights and related issues. There are these organizations, those that we interviewed, talk to us about a wide variety of approaches, including campaigns on data rights, including policy advocacy, strategic litigation, engagement with oversight bodies, also development of practical data rights tools that people can use online, and so on. But again, as it's in the nature of things, that they're often more reactive, happening after the harm, than proactive, preventing the harm of data beforehand. They often focus on individual harms, individual rights, and also individual responses. And there is a bit of a still, I would say, a fragmentation of civil society and separation between digital rights and social justice. That has changed a little bit over the years, and that is really promising to see. There are collaborations to bridge the gap between, for example, technology focus groups and other social justice initiatives, coalitions between digital rights networks and refugee networks and so on. And we've also had large organizations like Amnesty and others starting to go into the digital rights and data field. But in those interviews that we did, the kind of interviewees still highlighted this separation, this distinction, this fragmentation quite a bit. Alternative imaginaries and practices, we might say. Those that we talked with, particularly on the civil society side, refer to different kind of normative frameworks. Typically, there have been, let's say, 4 or 5 of them. One focusing on data commons and data as a public good. A second one, sometimes distinct, but of course also related, focusing on public procurement as a particular focus that that some people and organizations wanted to highlight, and where they saw a way forward. Third, algorithmic accountability. I already talked about this, the attempt to eliminate bias already in the technological development. Institutionalized forms of citizen participation, like those that I will talk about, and those that have been established in some places, like the Permanent Citizen Assembly in Scotland, for example, or I haven't established. There was a suggestion. And big data abolition, the dismantling of power structures upholding datafied inequality. And often we saw people referring to some of these, but there are tensions, of course, between those, also between the individual and the collective approach of different data imaginaries, and again, between a narrow tech focus and the need for broader structural change. And then with regards to data literacy, of course, participation requires knowledge and understanding. And there is now a wide range of existing literacy tools, initiatives, and programs, and increasingly they actually advance not just the development of skills with regards to data, but also critical awareness of datafication. That's quite interesting to see. But they often focus, and again, that's the practical implication, and often focus on already engaged citizens, less so on marginalized communities. That's a bit more of a challenge, obviously. Now, to go on towards that particular one that I was most involved with and that I just wanted to talk about a bit more for these last 10 minutes or so, is the work area that we had on models of civic engagement. Now, theoretically and conceptually, this relates to discussions in political science mostly about democratic innovation. It's about new processes, models, and practices that advance citizen voices in decision-making outside and beyond the classic processes of elections. And this includes popular assemblies and what has been described as mini-publics. These are initiatives that bring together a small section of society, of the population, for deliberation on key issues that society is facing, and ideally a small selection of society that somewhat would represent broader society, and kind of in their pure forms. Mini publics are organized through random selection, randomly putting together citizens. There are different models. There are citizen juries, citizen assemblies, deliberative polls, citizen summits, and then they are complemented by other forms of democratic innovation like participatory budgeting and so on. And all these, bring together a limited number of citizens for deliberation on key issues. And this has generated quite significant interest in recent years, I think. For example, we've also seen an OECD report a couple of years ago that is conspicuously titled "Innovative Citizen Participation and New Democratic Institutions Catching the Deliberative Wave." Currently, there's a wave going on. But there have been, I think, and I don't know, it's not, I think there's a point to that in a way, because there have been a number of really interesting international cases where mini publics have been used in interesting ways, sometimes quite successfully, sometimes not so much. But for example, with local and city development, or for the amendment or development of new constitutions, like in Ireland or in Iceland. In Ireland, successfully with regards to the outcome. In Iceland, actually, this is one up there. This picture on top left corner is one of the many, many deliberative events that they had in Iceland over the past 10, 12 years. Not so successfully with regards to the actual outcome, but I think quite successfully with regards to public debate and involving citizens in these social and political debates around constitution. And increasingly, these methods have been used for questions of data and AI. Actually, on the top right there, that is a picture from one of the meetings of the Oakland Surveillance Technology Ordinance, which gives citizens a voice in police use of surveillance technology. Similar methods have been applied to questions of data use in the UK on the issue of health data. There have been a number of citizen juries on questions of data sharing and questions of the use of data, of the use of AI, particularly in health and so on, to get a better understanding under what circumstances people would accept this, to what extent, and where they would draw the line. And so here at the bottom, we see one of those citizen juries in Manchester a few years ago. The Ada Lovelace Institute has run what they call citizen councils on the use of biometrics data and facial recognition. And see from one of those citizen councils, the other picture here at the top. And on the left, we see kind of a tentative and very, very incomplete list of a few recent events. There have been a lot more in the past 2-3 years and before. This is just to give a sense of the things that have been going on in this country quite a bit, I think. Different citizen juries, councils, summits, each bring together different numbers, some 22, 23 people, others 100 people, for sometimes several weekends, or sometimes 2 days in a row, or sometimes 3 or 4 days, to discuss particular issues, public dialogue events, and so on. Good. So can these practices advance participation in the datafied society and the governance of data? Do they re-establish a form of citizen agency? Well, one point that we were interested in is, to start with, is of course, can a complex topic such as data and AI actually be discussed by non-expert citizens with sufficient depth? And our interviewees said very, very clearly, yes, they can. We're having follow-up interviews now, not just with organizers, but with participants, and that will be interesting how that complements or changes our view on this. But so far, especially in the views of organizers, they said definitely yes, and they felt strongly that their own experiences demonstrated that ordinary citizens without prior knowledge of these issues were able to develop quite thorough outcomes and relevant policy recommendations also with regards to data and AI. What decision-making power do they have? What type of participation are we actually talking about? Is there an actual power shift, or is it about cooptation and legitimation of policies that are already being established and implemented? Is there a risk of what some have described as engagement washing or participation washing, creating the illusion of participation to justify and legitimize policy decisions? Well, we have to recognize, first of all, that most of these initiatives are deliberative. They're not about sharing power. They're about discussions. People can debate issues. People can give advice. not, at least in most cases, decide. Final decision-making power is not handed over to citizens, so that has to be clear from the outset. Sometimes also in some of these initiatives, it was really rather about finding out what people's preferences and perspectives are, like a poll or focus group, and some of the organizers actually refer to it a bit like that, as they would refer to a focus group. And some of these have actually been organized by also public opinion institutions and companies. So there is kind of a slide into that territory, certainly. At the same time, we found there is often a genuine motivation of engaging citizens, of advancing the voices of citizens. So we didn't see any very clear-cut cases of what we would call participation washing. Well, there, of course, there may be differences between organizers and those that commission these initiatives in politics. But anyway, these outcomes can have at least, I would say, normative power in affecting decision-making. So that compromised decision-making power is also related to the fact that citizen assemblies, citizen juries, public dialogues, and so on are often commissioned by government or larger think tanks and run by agencies that specialize on public opinion, as I said, and or the facilitation of larger events. Then typically not self-organized grassroots events run by the citizens whose voices should be amplified. They require a lot of resources and so on. That's how it often is, and that is a tension at the very core of these mechanisms, of course. And the tension is also how close you want to be to the policy arena and to government. Then you might have a more direct policy impact, but at the same time, the issues that you can talk about might be more confined, more guided by policy maker. And that then relates to the next point: how is the debate framed? Is there a bias towards a particular conclusion? How is this bias avoided? Is, for example, the value of data assumed from the outset? Well, several of the events that we looked at started out highlighting the value of data. The main goal seemed to be, sometimes in their own words, actually, to maintain public confidence, to build public trust, to respond to concerns. And so this would mean they were biased from the outset. There was little possibility for participants to define their own agenda, move the goalposts of the debate, reject even data uses, and unsurprisingly, the results of many of these events supported a wider use of AI. So that's not always been the case, or to certain certain different degrees, I would say, but we've definitely seen that. There's a further tension between the established structures of mini publics, which are often recruited through random sampling or represent society more widely, and the effects of datafication that I mentioned earlier, the inequality and how people are affected by datafication. Most of our interviewees felt that marginalized and particularly affected communities need to be prioritized in those exercises. And so it's important to have people there from impoverished, from racialized, from other communities, and to highlight their experiences. And well, at the lab, for example, we organized a workshop with social benefit claimants and related civil society organizations as part of a visit of the UN Rapporteur of Extreme Poverty a few years ago. And so also these voices came up pretty strongly there. One of our interviewees for this project said participation is not enough, you also need inclusion. And so that this raises questions about the kind of pure ideas of and concepts of mini publics, particularly as far as data is concerned. Outcomes and impact, well, I already talked about this, let's not repeat that. But finally, are these inevitably one-off events? How can we institutionalize civic participation? Well, there are interesting examples regarding participatory oversight. I already mentioned that. It may be an interesting task for the future to develop a more comprehensive system of participation, from citizen assemblies on broader questions to citizen juries on particular decisions, to permanent oversight boards and so on. that, for example, review procurement, but we're still a long way from that. Now, to conclude, does this mean we now have participatory and inclusive forms of data governance? Well, I don't know, I remember I'm actually at the end of our 45 minutes that we, more or less, that we talked about. If I can have a couple of more minutes, then I'll just, again, by the way of snapshots, look at a few points that we discussed in our, with regards to our conclusion of this research. Well, we can look at concepts such as Arnstein's ladder, which was developed in the context of city planning, and asked where we stand between the extreme positions, let's say, of citizen power at the top and participation washing, if we want to call it, at the bottom. We may be somewhere perhaps in the middle, or perhaps somewhere in the upper middle range. Arnstein discussed a form of participation that was called placation that might fit to some of these initiatives. Pateman, in earlier work, talked about partial participation. That assessment might be a bit sobering here, but I think it's also interesting to see what some of our interviewees said about this and felt about this. For example, this one here. Usually people situate citizen juries within the collaborative end of the spectrum. These processes are good at creating spaces where dynamics of power are more equally distributed than they otherwise would be. And I think that's a really important way of conceiving it, because they're often criticized for not being able to completely shift that dynamic. But the important point is that they shift the dynamic far more than most other engagement processes. So yeah, recognition that, of course, this does not mean citizen power in public decision making, but there are interesting steps taken towards that, let's say, in that direction, perhaps. Overall, what we tried to do with this project was to explore the opportunities and challenges for citizen participation in the governance of data, to find out what can, or what perhaps should be done to develop more democratic forms of a datafied society. We believe that these avenues, these 6 areas that we looked at, constitute something like maybe puzzle pieces of an emerging mosaic of public involvement in relation to data-driven decision-making, building blocks, perhaps promising building blocks, towards a greater involvement of citizens and public voices, let's say, and through different means and scenarios in decisions about the deployment and use of data systems. At the very least, I guess we can say they reflect a growing recognition that also among policymakers that people have been subjected to far-reaching forms of data analytics, with their lives being significantly affected, but without much understanding, voice, and influence. They are certainly nascent practices, often isolated, often ad hoc. They remain far from a coherent and systematic democratization of data governance. But on the plus side, there exist many ideas and many concepts to both imagine and construct more participatory forms of data governance. And yeah, there is already a wide variety of existing practices, from citizen summits to community oversight to civil society campaigns to data literacy, online tools, and so on, that are perhaps like carving out participatory spaces piece by piece and enhancing civic engagement. I want to leave it at that. There are many broader questions probably that came out of that. I haven't even started to go into the question, would we want more participatory forms of governance? Should everyone be required to participate in that? And these kind of broader meta questions, of course, where we were starting from, is kind of this normative, or is kind of the, as I said at the beginning, the understanding or the kind of the analysis of many people that there is a problem with regards to obscurity and lack of transparency and lack of engagement. And then based on that, the question on, yeah, how could that be changed and what are avenues for changing that? But where we go from there, that is then part of the broader debate. Thank you.